Today, we will be talking about gas exchange. We will be covering four parts: the introduction, tracheal system in fish and insects, human respiratory system, and transport of gases in the body.
Gases must first dissolve in a fluid in order to diffuse across a membrane. Therefore, all gas exchange systems require a moist environment. This process is called respiration. There are three phases involved in gas exchange. First is breathing. As we inhale, oxygen enters the body and diffuses across the cells lining the lungs and the surrounding blood vessels. At the same time, carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into our lungs. Carbon dioxide leaves our body when we exhale. The second phase is the transport of gases, which is supported by the circulatory system. In this phase, the oxygen binds to the hemoglobin in red blood cells. Carbon dioxide is also transported in blood from tissues back to our lungs. And the last phase is the exchange of gases, wherein our cells take up oxygen from the blood and release carbon dioxide to the blood. Gas exchange involves both the circulatory and respiratory systems in servicing our body's cells. A respiratory surface is a part of the animal's body where the process of gas exchange occurs. It is made up of living cells with plasma membrane which should be kept wet to function properly. Gas exchange occurs by diffusion. The surface area of the respiratory surface must be large enough to take up sufficient oxygen for every cell in the body. There are four types of respiratory organs. Those are the structures in which gas exchange with external environment occurs. Some animals use their entire outer skin as a gas exchange organ. An earthworm is a good example. The figure shows that there are no specialized gas exchange surfaces. Animals that use their skin as a respiratory organ must live in damp places or in water because their whole body surface must be moist. These creatures are generally small, long and thin, or flattened. These shapes allows a sufficient gas exchange for all cells in the body. Most aquatic animals use gills as their respiratory organ. Gills are extensions of the body surface specialized for gas exchange. As indicated in the figure, gases diffuse across the gill surface between the water and the blood. Insects use the tracheal system as their respiratory organ. It is an extensive system of branching internal tubes called tracheae. The gas exchange in insects does not require support from the circulatory system. Lastly, lungs are used by most terrestrial vertebrates. These are internal sacs lined with moist epithelium. Gases are carried between the lungs and the body cells by the circulatory system.
We have just finished the introduction to gas exchange. Let us now move on to the tracheal system in fish and insects.
Fish gills are among the most efficient gas exchange organs in the world. There are four supporting gill arches on each side of the body, which is composed of two rows of gill filament. Each filament bears many flattened plates called lamella. Lamella is the actual respiratory surface. It is full of tiny capillaries that are so narrow that red blood cells pass through them in a single file. Countercurrent exchange for oxygen to diffuse into the blood. As you can see in the figure, the direction of the flow of water is opposite to that on the flow of blood. This countercurrent exchange mechanism is so efficient that fish gills can remove more than 80% of the dissolved oxygen in water flowing through them. No matter how efficient they may be, gills are unsuitable for an animal living on land. An expansive surface of wet membrane extending out from the body and exposed to air would lose too much water to evaporation. Therefore, most terrestrial animals house their respiratory surfaces within the body opening to the atmosphere through narrow tubes as we see next.
Let us now watch a video clip on the tracheal system of insects.
Tracheal system in insects. Respiratory system in insects, like cockroaches, flies, etc. Respiration takes place through tracheal system to reduce water loss. Tracheal system is a network of tubes that frame the entire body of the insect. The trachea is open to the exterior through microscopic pores called spiracles, which are arranged on either side of the body segments. Each spiracle leads into a cavity, the tracheal chamber, from which the branches arise. Air enters the body through these spiracles. Tracheoles, the minute branches of trachea, reach each and every cell in the body, and each cell gets oxygen directly. Alternate contraction and expansion movements of the abdomen expel and take air into the tracheal system. When the abdomen expands, inspiration of air takes place, and during the contraction of the abdomen, air is expelled through the spiracles. Evolution of lungs. Tetrapods evolved from a faint organism that lived in the water. However, this ancestor was not like most of the fish we are familiar with today. Most animals we call fishes today are ray-finned fishes, the group nearest the root of this evergrande. Ray-finned fishes comprise some 25,000 living species, far more than all the other vertebrates combined. They have fin rays, that is, a system of often branching bony rays called lepidotrichia that emanate from the base of the fin. In contrast, the other animals in the evergrande, coelacants, lungfishes, all the other extinct animals, plus tetrapods, have what we call fleshy fins or lobe fins. That is, their limbs are covered by muscle and skin. Some, such as coelacants, retain lepidotrichia at the ends of these fleshy limbs, but in most fleshy fin animals, these have been lost. The common ancestor of all those different organisms was neither a lobe fin nor a ray fin. This ancient vertebrate lineage had fins, scales, gills, and lived in the water. Yet, they also had air bladders or air-filled sacs connected to the back of their throats that could be used for breathing air or for buoyancy control. The air bladders of many ray fins no longer connect to their throats, and so they are not able to breathe air. In these ray fins, the air bladder is used mainly for buoyancy control and is known as swim bladder. By contrast, tetrapods have taken an alternative route. They have lost the buoyancy control function of their air bladders, and instead, these organisms been elaborated to form the lungs that we all use to get around on land. When we get past coelacants and lungfishes on the evergrande, we find a series of fossil forms that lived between about 390 and 360 million years ago during the Devonian period. During this interval, this lineage of fleshy fin organisms moved from the water to the land. Many parts of the skeleton changed as new innovations that permitted life on land evolved.
Just a recap. Fish uses a type of ventilation called counter-current exchange, while tracheal system in insects do not use their circulatory system. Let us now move on to the human respiratory system. Let's now watch a video clip about the human respiratory system.
Human respiratory system. Air first enters through the body, through the mouth or nose. But it is better to breathe through the nostrils since air is being filtered by hairs, warmed, and sampled for others as it flows through the nasal cavity. The air then quickly moves through the pharynx or throat. From there, the air passes through the larynx or voice box and enters the trachea. The trachea is a strong tube that contains rings of cartilage that prevent it from collapsing. Within the lungs, the trachea branches into a left and right bronchus, which further divide into smaller and smaller branches called bronchioles. The smallest bronchioles have attached tiny air sacs called alveoli, which inflate in inhalation and deflate in exhalation. Gas exchange is the delivery of oxygen from the lungs to the bloodstream and the elimination of carbon dioxide from the bloodstream to the lungs. Exchange of gases occurs in the lungs between the alveoli and a network of tiny blood vessels called capillaries, which are located in the walls of alveoli. Here, you see red blood cells traveling through the capillaries. The walls of alveoli actually share membrane with the capillaries. That's how close they are. This makes it possible for oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse or move freely between the respiratory system and the bloodstream. Oxygen molecules attach to red blood cells, which travel back to the heart. At the same time, the carbon dioxide molecules in the alveoli are blown out of the body with the next exhalation. Gas exchange allows the body to replenish the oxygen and eliminate the carbon dioxide, both of which are necessary for survival.
Smoking is a serious assault on the respiratory system. Inside the lungs are mucus and cilia. These two help clean and filter the air we inhale. Tobacco from smoking irritates these cells, blocking and eventually destroying them. As smokers cough, it is actually the attempt of the respiratory system to clear the particles blocking the cilia. Smoking can cause lung cancer, heart disease, and emphysema. And because smoking kills the cilia cells found in the lungs, it accounts for 90% of all lung cancer cases. The type of breathing movement or ventilation that we use is called negative pressure breathing. Let us now watch a short clip about it. Inspiration or inhalation. Here, the pressure in the lungs is decreased as the air rushes in. The muscles of the diaphragm contract to make it descend. The rib cage moves upward and outwards. Expiration or exhalation. The pressure in the lungs is increased as the air is pushed out. The diaphragm relaxes and moves up. Simultaneously, the rib cage moves down and in. Going back, the maximal inhalation and exhalation is called vital capacity. Each year, we take about 4 to 10 million breaths, averaging around 3.4 and 4.8 liters. Imagine how much our lungs can do and how much pressure it takes. But our lungs actually exceed the maximum vital capacity because the alveoli does not exhale air completely. Air called dead air remain in the lungs even after you exhale as much air as you can. And because the lungs is not completely empty, whenever you inhale, you actually mix up fresh air with used up air or oxygen depleted air that resides in your lungs. And this becomes a factor for the increase in lung diseases like emphysema, wherein the lungs are enlarged, causing difficulty in breathing and gasping. Unlike us, birds are actually more efficient. In their one-way flow of air, oxygen-depleted air does not remain in the bird's lungs after exhalation. Breathing is automatically controlled. Most of us think that breathing is an involuntary movement. Well, that is not the case. There is actually what we call breathing control centers located in the brain called the medulla oblongata. The nerve from the breathing control centers signals a motor nerve in the spinal cord which controls the diaphragm and the rib muscles, allowing them to contract, causing you to inhale. This breathing control center regulates our breathing in response to the change in carbon dioxide level of the blood. Like for example, when you do heavy exercises, your cells actually generate more carbon dioxide as a waste product. Now, this carbon dioxide moves into the blood where it reacts with water to form what we call carbonic acid. This carbonic acid slightly lowers the pH of the blood. As the medulla senses this pH drop, the breathing control center increases the rate and depth of your breathing. Try recalling your breathing pattern when you run. Isn't it that you inhale and exhale faster? Likewise with carbon dioxide, oxygen also has an effect. When oxygen levels are low, the breathing control center increases the blood oxygen level. The secondary control over breathing is the heart, specifically the aorta and the carotid arteries. These two monitor the concentrations of oxygen as well as carbon dioxide. When oxygen levels are extremely low, the aorta and the carotid arteries send signals to the control centers via nerves to increase the rate and depth of your breathing. An example is when you are in high altitude place, where air is so thin that oxygen is hard to get while breathing normally. Your aorta and carotid arteries send nerve signals to the medulla to increase the rate and depth of your breathing. Unlike the airflow of insects, wherein the circulatory system has nothing to do with the respiration, humans need the circulatory system because this transports the blood to and from the capillaries in the alveoli. We have now reached the final part of our topic, transport of gases in the human body. Let us now watch two video clips about blood transport.
Gaseous exchange initially takes place between the ovuli of the lungs and blood capillaries and finally between blood capillaries and body tissues by a process called diffusion. The process of diffusion is directly proportional to the partial pressure exerted by individual respiratory gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide. Gases exchange in the lungs occur due to the difference in partial pressure, which leads to diffusion of oxygen from ovuli to blood capillaries and carbon dioxide from blood capillaries to the ovuli. Exchange of gases between blood capillaries and body tissues also occur by the same mechanism. All cells require oxygen since it is the essential fuel of cell. It is necessary to enable cells to stay alive and carry out various activities. Bringing oxygen to cells requires the uptake of oxygen from the air in the lungs, transportation in the blood, and delivery to cells all over the body. Taking up of O2 in the blood flowing through fine capillaries in the walls of the lungs, air sac called alveoli. The oxygen molecule change from their state as a gas, freely circulating to the air, dissolving into a solution in the plasma within the capillaries of the alveoli. Once in the solution of the blood, 98 of the dissolved oxygen is taken up by passing red blood cells, leaving 2% remaining in the solution unattached. Blood cells are suited in transporting oxygen since they contain special oxygen-binding protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an iron-containing molecule which binds oxygen loosely and reversibly. When blood is fully saturated with oxygen, it is bright red and it is called oxyhemoglobin. When blood is not fully saturated, it is purplish blue and called the oxyhemoglobin. Attached to each polypeptide of a hemoglobin is a chemical group called heme. It makes it possible for RBC to pick up oxygen dissolved in the blood, transport and combine it with hemoglobin and release it back into the blood as oxygen solution ready for delivery to various cells. Hemoglobin gives up oxygen as red cells travel to capillaries into tissues where there are low content or partial pressure of oxygen. Partial pressure represents the level of dissolved oxygen in plasma. As O2 is released to the solution, the partial pressure of oxygen in the capillaries becomes greater than the partial pressure of oxygen in the surrounding tissues. This causes the oxygen to move out of their capillaries into the tissues and finally reach the cell. The fetus literally swims in a protective watery bath, the amniotic fluid. The fetus lungs are non-functional since it is filled with fluid. Instead, it exchanges gases with maternal blood in the placenta. In the placenta, capillaries of maternal blood and fetal blood run next to each other. The placenta is a composite organ that includes tissues from both fetus and mother. The fetus and mother do not share the same blood. At birth, placental gas exchange with the mother ceases, where CO2 stops diffusing from the fetus into the placenta.
Pulmonary diseases and their preventions. Pneumonia. Pneumonia is the acute inflammation of the lungs, leading to severe respiratory problems, and is caused by bacteria, amoeba, viruses, fungi, parasites, or injury to the lungs. Acute bronchitis. Acute bronchitis is characterized by the inflammation of trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles, generally due to viral infection in the upper respiratory tract and due to exposure of the lungs in a polluted air. Viral infections may lead to secondary infections by bacteria. The number one preventive measures are: first, always observe proper hygiene, and most of all, stop smoking. The sooner you quit smoking, the better chance of avoiding chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. Remember, more than 85% of COPD cases are caused by tobacco smoking. That's because the chemical in the smoke stimulates inflammation in the lungs that complete the chronic bronchitis or the emphysema, making it difficult to breathe every day.